Dean Martin was 3 drinks into his NBC special when the casino owner walked onto the live set, not as a guest, not as a friend, but as a man who had come to humiliate him in front of 30 million viewers. And in that moment, the band went quiet. The audience shifted in their seats, and Dean did something that would be talked about in Vegas for the next 50 years. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand Las Vegas in 1967, a city where casino owners did not just run hotels. They ran people, they owned the stages, they owned the contracts, and they believed with absolute certainty that they owned the entertainers who performed for them. Dean Martin was the hottest act on television. His Thursday night variety show pulling audiences of 40 million Americans every week, numbers that made him untouchable by Hollywood standards. But Vegas operated by different rules. The men who built that city from desert sand did not care about ratings or network executives. They cared about respect, about control, about making sure everyone understood their place in the hierarchy, and Dean Martin had been quietly violating every one of those unwritten rules for years. He showed up late to casino commitments, sometimes not at all. He left shows early when he felt like it, and worst of all, he treated casino bosses like they were ordinary men rather than the kings they believed themselves to be. One owner in particular had been nursing a grudge for months, a man named Vincent Caruso, who ran one of the largest casino operations on the Strip and who had a reputation for never letting a slight go unpunished. Caruso had connections at NBC, he had leverage with network executives, and he had spent weeks planning exactly how he was going to put Dean Martin in his place, live on national television, where everyone in America would see the great Dean Martin humbled by a man who understood real power. The warnings started coming 3 days before the broadcast, quiet whispers from cocktail waitresses and pit bosses who owed Dean favors from years of generous tips and genuine kindness. People who had seen Vincent Caruso holding meetings in back rooms, people who had heard him talking about teaching Dean Martin a lesson he would never forget. Dean's manager, Herman Citrone, was beside himself, pacing the dressing room, begging Dean to cancel the show, or at least beef up security or call in some favors with the network brass. But Dean just sat there adjusting his cufflinks with the calm of a man who had grown up around tough guys in Steubenville, Ohio, and had learned a long time ago that showing fear was the fastest way to lose. "Let him do what he wants," Dean told Herman. "I have got a show to do." And that was the end of the conversation. The night of the broadcast, the NBC studio was electric with the usual pre-show energy, cameras being positioned, lighting technicians making final adjustments, an audience of 800 people buzzing with anticipation to see the King of Cool in person. But backstage, there was a different kind of electricity, a nervous tension that had nothing to do with showtime jitters. Dean walked onto that stage at exactly 9 o'clock Pacific time, looking like he did not have a care in the world, drink in hand, smile easy and warm, launching into his opening number while 40 million Americans settled into their living rooms to watch. He was 3 songs in, the audience laughing at his jokes, swaying to his music, completely under his spell when the commotion started backstage. Vincent Caruso had arrived with 6 of his men, and when security tried to stop them, a phone call came down from a network executive telling everyone to stand aside, let them through, do not make trouble. Dean was halfway through That Is Amore when Caruso walked directly onto the live set, past the cameras, past the stunned crew members, right into the pool of light where Dean Martin stood performing for the largest television audience in America. The band faltered, musicians looking at each other in confusion, unsure whether to keep playing or stop. The studio audience went dead silent, 800 people holding their breath as this large, angry man in an expensive suit positioned himself 10 feet from the most beloved entertainer in the country. Dean saw him immediately. There was no way not to, but he did something that stunned everyone watching. He did not stop singing. He finished his phrase, held the last note, let it hang in the suddenly silent room, and then turned to face Vincent Caruso with the same relaxed expression he might use to greet an old friend who had shown up unexpectedly at a party. Vincent Caruso had rehearsed this moment. You could tell by the way he launched into his speech without hesitation, his voice loud enough for the microphones to pick up every word as he listed his grievances against Dean Martin for all of America to hear, calling him unprofessional, disrespectful, ungrateful, a man who thought he was too good for the people who had made him, who showed up late and left early, and treated the men who built Las Vegas like they were beneath his notice. The audience sat in mortified silence. 800 people watching a car crash they could not look away from. Crew members frozen at their stations, afraid to move or speak or do anything that might make the situation worse. And through it all, Dean Martin just stood there, drink in hand, one eyebrow slightly raised, listening with the patient expression of a man watching a child throw a tantrum in a grocery store. Caruso went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 90 seconds, building to what he clearly believed would be a devastating conclusion about respect and consequences and knowing your place. And when he finally finished, breathing hard from the exertion of his righteous anger, Dean took a slow sip of his drink, let the silence stretch for one perfect beat, and said, "Well, pal, are you done? Because the band charges by the hour, and I have got a show to finish." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience, and something shifted in the room, the first crack in the wall of tension Caruso had built. Dean gestured casually toward a chair at the edge of the stage and told Caruso to sit down, relax, have a drink, you look like you could use one. And before the casino owner could respond, Dean had already signaled to someone off stage who appeared moments later with a glass of scotch. "You know I have performed for presidents," Dean continued, his voice easy and warm and utterly untroubled. "I have performed for kings. I have performed for some of the most powerful people in the world, and now I get to add whatever you are to that list. What an honor." The laughter was louder now, the audience beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary, watching Dean Martin dismantle this angry, powerful man with nothing but words and timing and that effortless charm that made him the biggest star in America. Caruso tried to interject, tried to reclaim control of the moment he had planned so carefully, but Dean just kept going, asking the audience if they had ever seen someone so desperate for attention, wondering aloud if maybe what this fellow really needed was not a confrontation, but a lullaby. And tell you what, pal, if you sit down and behave yourself, I will sing you one personally, tuck you right in. Maybe that is what has been missing in your life. A little tenderness. The audience erupted, 800 people laughing and applauding, and in that moment, you could see it happen. You could see Vincent Caruso realize that he had made a terrible mistake, that instead of humiliating Dean Martin, he had handed him the greatest performance of his career. Dean did not wait for a response. He simply turned to the band, gave them the signal, and launched into the next song as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And Vincent Caruso, the man who had planned this ambush for weeks, the man who had used his connections and his power to force his way onto a live television broadcast, had no choice but to slink off camera in defeat, smaller somehow than when he had arrived, while Dean Martin sang and smiled and proved to 40 million Americans exactly why they called him the King of Cool. Dean Martin finished that show like nothing had happened, singing 4 more songs, telling jokes, charming the audience with the same easy grace he had displayed before Vincent Caruso ever walked onto that stage. And when the cameras finally stopped rolling and the lights came down, he walked backstage where his entire team stood in stunned silence. Managers and producers and crew members who had just witnessed something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. And Dean just poured himself another drink, loosened his tie, and asked if anyone knew a good place to get Italian food at this hour. Vincent Caruso left that studio a different man than when he arrived. His carefully planned humiliation turned into his own public embarrassment, broadcast live to 40 million Americans who had watched him get dismantled by a man holding a cocktail glass. By the next morning, the story had spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. Every casino, every showroom, every backroom where powerful men gathered to discuss business, everyone was talking about what Dean Martin had done to Vincent Caruso on national television. The other casino owners took notice, not because they felt sorry for Caruso, but because they understood the lesson that Knight had taught, that Dean Martin was not a man you could intimidate, not a man you could bully, not a man who played by the rules that governed everyone else in their world. Caruso's reputation never recovered. He became a punchline in a town that had no tolerance for weakness, the man who tried to embarrass Dean Martin and ended up destroying himself instead. Dean's fee went up after that night. His leverage with the casinos increased, and for the rest of his career in Las Vegas, no one ever tried anything like that again. But the real significance of what happened that night went deeper than business arrangements and power dynamics. It revealed something fundamental about who Dean Martin actually was beneath the persona, beneath the easy smile and the ever-present drink, and the image of effortless cool he had cultivated for decades. Most people would have panicked in that situation, would have gotten angry or defensive, or tried to fight back on Caruso's terms. But Dean understood something that most people never grasp, that the only power an intimidator has is the power you give them by being intimidated. His famous drunk act, the stumbling and the slurring and the self-deprecating jokes about his drinking was not just entertainment, it was armor. Because you cannot embarrass a man who has already made himself the joke. You cannot humiliate someone who refuses to take himself seriously enough to be humiliated. Dean Martin grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, surrounded by tough guys and gamblers and men who settled disputes with violence, and he learned early that the ones who survived were not always the strongest or the meanest, but the ones who knew how to read a room, how to diffuse tension, how to make enemies into friends, or at least into people who left you alone. Frank Sinatra called Dean the next day and asked him what the hell he had been thinking, standing there calmly while an angry casino owner berated him on live television. And Dean told him the same thing he had told his manager before the show, that if you act scared, you lose, that the moment you let someone see they have gotten to you, they own you forever. That is what made Dean Martin the king of cool. Not just the talent and the charisma and the voice that made women swoon and men want to buy him a drink, but the absolute refusal to acknowledge that anyone or anything had power over him. He did not fight Vincent Caruso that night. He did not argue or defend himself or try to match anger with anger. He simply acted as if the whole situation was mildly amusing rather than threatening, and in doing so, he took away every bit of power Caruso thought he had. Years later, when people asked Dean about that night, he would shrug and say he just did not want some guy ruining his show, as if facing down an angry casino owner on live television was no more significant than dealing with a heckler at a nightclub. That was Dean Martin, the man who made everything look easy, who turned potential disaster into triumph with nothing but timing and charm, and an unshakable belief that no one else got to decide how he felt about himself. They called him the king of cool, because cool was not something he performed. It was something he was, all the way down to his bones. And on that night, in 1967, 40 million Americans got to see exactly what that meant.